everyone in this beautiful space. You're going to hear tonight about an amazing lineup of speakers who are all involved in Just Stop Oil, and we're going to go through as well kind of ways of where you can get involved too, be it donating, volunteering, doing an action training, and slow marching with us. Slow marching, just to explain what it is to people who are not familiar with, is exactly as it sounds. It's just marching super slowly down the road, like as slow as you can. Even when you think you're not slow enough, like you can always be slower. It's our main tactic at the moment. It's super effective for disruption, and it's also a really good gateway action. You see, if you've never been in civil disobedience or resistance before, it's a great way to get on the street and feel the power that we have when we're all walking down a block down the road and with traffic behind us. It's still a low risk of arrest, and it's a really good opportunity to get involved. So tonight we're going to hear about the climate science, and that is Harley, just there, yes.
No. Right, okay, I'm going to be awkward. Everyone's sitting closer, get in, let's move in. We're not going to do the whole standing, everyone's really far apart. It ruins the emotional timber somehow, I don't know why. You're over here close enough. Yeah, close enough.
It's way more comfy.
Maybe too close.
It's very comfy here. I'm staying here. I'm close enough.
That's all good, as long as we throw it in. My name's Harley. I used to be an English tutor. So I used to teach school kids and university students. I used to do some English, used to do a bit of philosophy as well. But I've stopped doing that now to do climate work. So the reason I did that is, I don't know if you've ever had like a young person come to you and ask anything about the climate, but my students used to ask me all the time, like especially when it got to 2019 and it was the school strikes, it was Greta, there was all this stuff happening on television, there's a big David Attenborough documentary, all the rest. And my students started asking me questions about, what do you think is going to happen with the climate? What do you think the future holds? What do you think we should be doing? And at this point, I was already terrified of what I thought was going to happen. At this point, I was already kind of unsettled and starting to get this sort of big dread in the pit of my stomach that, God, this is really bad. But I found it very difficult to speak to the students and tell them this is how bad I think it is when they would ask me that question. I mean, one of them, he was 16. I was teaching him English because he was doing very badly in English, but he was really good at lots of his other subjects. He wanted to do computer science. And he wanted to work for Google. That was his big dream. He was going to work for Google. And he asked me, what do I think is going to happen with the climate? And I couldn't tell him because I didn't want to take this like young teenager who's got this big vision for his life that I'm going to do this, I'm going to have a family, I'm going to do yada yada yada. I didn't want to tell him that, well, if what the science is telling us is true, that life is probably unlikely to happen for you. You're not going to have the life that your parents have had. You're not going to get this, live to a ripe old age. Or if you do, it's going to be in a world which is so different that your plans will be meaningless. And so I didn't tell him. I didn't tell any of my students. I pretended it was better than it was. I was like, yeah, it's pretty bad, but why don't you could join a school strike, maybe, if you can have a look into like recycling. And I was like, ask your teachers, maybe, let's see what they tell you about this. I did that with all my students. I never told them. And there's basically a similar thing happening with the way that people on television talk about it, the way that scientists talk about it. They're doing a similar thing than what I did. And I don't know if it's the same motivation. Mine was like a fear of upsetting them, a fear of seeing like just upsetting a child. It's a big thing to do. But they also do it and we've just seen it now. I don't know if anyone's heard the news that it's now public information that we're going over 1.5 degrees, that the Paris Climate Agreement, the heralded as this big victory, has actually failed. We're going over 1.5 degrees. We're going to get the, if anyone remembers, that was called the barrier, that was the threshold of catastrophic climate change. So we're going to get what the scientists say is catastrophic climate change, right? And obviously there's no big fanfare that, oh wow, we've gone over 1.5 degrees, and everyone's saying, fuck, we need to do something now. It's like, oh, we've gone over 1.5 degrees. Next. I was watching Novara Media, it's supposed to be a bit on it with this, like the news, like telling us like a realer truth than you would get on like mainstream media or something. And they had a climate scientist on who says, we're going to go over 1.5 degrees, but it's quite likely that, in a few years as we get a cooling period, we might go down again, we might go below. And it's like, and this could increase droughts, it could increase flooding, it could increase famine, it could increase all these other things. But it's not saying the full picture. It's not saying that, it could get cooler for a bit, but it's going to keep getting warmer, right? It wasn't this big moment of, fuck, we've done it, we've crossed the threshold that we kept saying, this is what we have to avoid at all costs, right? We've gone over it. And the reaction is nothing, it's a mumble, right? And it's taken 7 years, 8 years since the Paris Climate Agreement for that to become public knowledge. But there were climate scientists at the Paris Agreement who were saying that it wasn't possible then. Not publicly, but they were saying it then at the conference. And we know this because some of the scientists that were there wrote an article about this. They published it in 2019, saying that they didn't know of a single scientist that was present at the Paris Agreement that thought staying below 1.5 degrees was possible. And guess what? It's not possible. We've done it. We've gone over 1.5 degrees. And the issue with this is that we don't talk about, when we talk about we've gone over 1.5 degrees, we don't say, well, what does that mean? What's that going to do to us? What does that do to human beings? We talk about that, it's going to be droughts, it's going to be famines. But that's like some abstract concept of famine. Oh, there's going to be a food shortage. It means nothing, right? Does that change the way we feel? Does that give us this sort of existential crisis in our bodies that we know that there's something horrific happening? It doesn't me. It makes me think, that's like especially the way that you see the way scientists talk about the news. It's like, this will increase flooding, this will increase droughts, this will increase wildfires. It's this monotone way. It's not human lives are going to be destroyed by this, and it's going to get worse and worse. So I'm going to basically give 2 facts about the climate. I'm not going to talk about many things. I'm going to give 2 facts, and then we're going to move on to what we're going to do about it. So the first fact is that when we're talking about 1.5 degrees, we're talking about average global temperature, right? And that's not going to be 1.5 degrees where human beings live. I don't know if anyone remembers, last year it was 40 degrees in the UK. Does anyone remember that? Yes, I remember it. It's quite warm, wasn't it? Not very nice. That was at 1.2 degrees of warming, right? We had a 40-degree day. 100 years ago, the warmest day in the UK was 36 degrees. The warmest day 100 years ago was 36 degrees. So at 1.2 degrees of warming, what we've actually felt, right, as an extreme temperature, is over 4 degrees warmer. There's a paper, The Future of the Human Niche, right? Again, the world is a large thing. There's water, there's land, human beings live on the land, right? 1.5 degrees, we're probably going to go over that, right? The Paris Agreement said we have to definitely, there's no way we can go over 2 degrees, right? Because they were talking about civilizational collapse at 2 degrees. We cannot go over 2 degrees. But what does 2 degrees look like on land where human beings live? Well, the Future of the Human Niche says that 2 degrees, global average temperature rise, is 7 degrees average on land. Because the oceans heat up a lot slower than the land, right? The land heats up faster. So when we're imagining a 2 degree world, we're imagining a 7 degree warmer on land where human beings live. All right, that's fact number 1. 2 degrees is 7 degrees. That's not the difference between a jumper and a t-shirt. That's the difference between crops failing and crops growing. 7 degrees. Right, that's the first fact. The second fact is what that's going to do. This is going to be hundreds of millions of people who can't live where they live now. Hundreds of millions of people who won't be able to live organized human life where they live, and they're going to flee. They're going to leave the places that become uninhabitable, the places in the equator, the places in Africa, the places in India, the places in China, which are going to become uninhabitable. The places in southern Europe, which are going to become uninhabitable. They're going to leave those places. And it's going to trigger the largest migration in human history. Do I need to go into details what that's going to look like? In the Second World War, there were 50 million refugees. An entire continent was destroyed, and there was 50 million refugees. It's estimated that between 1 and 3.5 billion people will be forced to move. Think about that. If World War II is one of the worst things that's happened in human history, what does it look like when we're looking at something orders of magnitude larger than that? And what have the press, what have the government, right? What have the influential people done in this country when we've gone over 1.5 degrees and hundreds of millions of people are going to leave their homes? They've done fuck all. They've acted as if it's a normal day. As if the day when we cross this threshold is just like every other. That's fact number 2. Hundreds of millions of people are going to have to flee their homes. Those are 2 facts taken. I'm not talking about wildfires, I'm not talking about the flooding, I'm not talking about the collapse of ecosystems or the marine environment. That's just 2 facts. 2 parts of a much larger picture. I don't know if anyone thought like I did, that there would be a certain point where people would realise, it's like we would move past a certain point and it would be, wow, we've done that, fuck, we better start doing it. You know that feeling when you've got homework? It's not the vibe, baby.
That's what happens when you go past a certain point.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. Across the threshold, that's the tipping point. We've got to the psychedelic part of the talk.
Can we celebrate the worse things they get, the more people are waking up? So we should actually celebrate. Do you have a champagne? Can I order a champagne for everyone to celebrate this moment? Because this is the tipping point where enough is enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to disagree with that point, which is what I was going to make, which is the change in the climate situation hasn't led to a difference in the way people are acting. People are acting the same way. At COP26, that was supposed to be the last chance we had, right? It was being called, this is it, this is the last chance to get stable at 1.5 degrees. Did world leaders act differently, or did they do the same thing they've done for the last 26 years? They did the exact same thing. They didn't talk about ending fossil fuels, they didn't talk about ending animal agriculture, they didn't talk about stopping deforestation, they did nothing. And they're going to do it again when people are fleeing in tens of millions. They're going to do the same thing. There's not going to be a point where the government just wakes up. There's not going to be a point where the CEOs of oil companies think, do you know what, we've actually made enough money. There's not going to be that point. Ordinary people have to make that thing happen, right? And we are running out of time to do it. I said I'd only give 2 facts, but I'm going to give a 3rd fact, right? Because it's been a bad week. Peter Kalmus, one of the world's leading scientists, right? He worked for NASA, and now he does full-time climate activism, right? He made a statement 2 days ago that NASA scientists that have been studying the Amazon, right? NASA scientists that have been studying the Amazon were beginning to speak about, this is it, the Amazon's done. We've crossed the tipping point with the Amazon. It's past the point of no return. There's nothing we can do now to prevent it collapsing. Right? Again, is there a whirlwind from this? Is there a massive wave? No, there isn't. There's not going to be a magic moment where people wake up. I know I've said that twice, but that's the most important thing I'm going to tell you tonight. Is that unless ordinary people say, we're not going to take it, we're going to stop it, it's not going to stop. Right, I'm going to pass to Aaron, and Aaron's going to talk about how ordinary people are going to do it.
Hey, so yeah, I'm going to talk about the solutions to the climate crisis. So, one solution is insulation, right? We could, well, right now, the UK government could insulate all the coldest homes in Britain. Take a few months. It would go a massive way to cutting our carbon emissions and save thousands of lives, and they'd get that money back, right? Fairly quickly. A few years, they get it back. That's one solution. Or renewables. In certain cases, renewables are 9 times cheaper than renewable generated energy than fossil fuel generated energy. In most cases, they're on par, right? And yet in the UK, we subsidize the fossil fuel industry hundreds of millions of pounds every single week. Way, way more than we subsidize renewables. So subsidize renewables, that's one solution. And you can keep going with these solutions. There's dozens of them. They're pretty just common sense. But as we all know, it's pointless listing this stuff because it's not going to happen, right? We could do it now. We could have done it years ago, but it hasn't happened. And the reason for that is that the climate crisis is not a technological or a scientific problem. We have the technology to go most of the way there already, but we're not doing anything about it. So when we talk about solutions to the climate crisis, it's not going to be some new technology. It's going to be a social solution, right? How do we force our governments to make change? It seems hopeless. We're up against the fossil fuel industry, pretty much. They have essentially unlimited resources to spend defending themselves, firmly entrenched in government. Shell made like $40 billion last year. There was a windfall tax proposed with one loophole that if they reinvest some of that money into making new fossil fuel projects, extracting more, then they get to avoid the tax. So what we're up against is, extremely powerful institutions. But if we look back throughout history, this situation is not unique. Many times throughout human history, we've gone up against, we've done similar kinds of things, right? And what started with relatively small groups of ordinary people ballooned, and those people won, right? Using a tactic called disruptive direct action. This is like the solution to the climate crisis, right? It's not conventional protest. That's not what we're talking about. When I first started doing this, I was doing a lot of leafleting, right? I ran into this woman, it still sticks in my mind. She had this really, really strong reaction when I tried to give it, started shouting, like, get away from me, And so I was so shocked by it, I actually asked her why, like, what's going on? This woman knew about the scale of the climate crisis. It's not your average, climate denier, right? But she'd been so disillusioned with our ability to make change that she had this reaction. And actually fair enough, because turns out she'd been part of the 2003 Iraq War protests. So I don't know if any of you know this. I didn't know it at the time, but this is considered the largest internationally coordinated protest movement in human history, right? 48 countries, millions of people around the world, and in London, 1 to 2 million people marched through the streets, demanding their governments, do not invade Iraq. So yeah, this march happened in London, and she'd been part of that march. She marched with that million people. and it must have felt very powerful to her, right? And so it makes sense why she was disillusioned, because what did it actually do? You know, if we're honest about it, it did nothing. The invasion went ahead, and you know, just the other day there was this report, around 5 million people have been killed by the war on terror, which kind of started with that. So we're not talking about marches or petitions or letters to MPs, right? This has been tried for the last 40 years. It's done nothing. It's got us to the situation we're in. Imagine, right, if those million people, I mean, to be honest, if you just think about it, it doesn't make any sense why 1 million people marching would do anything. Like, you know, they march on Friday, and then Saturday the momentum builds, right? And then, okay, on Sunday they're marching, but you know, they've got jobs, so they need to go back to work on Monday. So Sunday night comes around, they all go home. Why would that solve anything, right? It doesn't. What might have worked, in fact, what 100% would have worked, is if those 1 million people had sat down in the road, you know, in London, and said, fuck this, we're not leaving till our governments commit not to invading Iraq. They would have won 100%. You cannot arrest 1 million people. How long would it have taken? You can argue, but it would have worked, right? So that's disruptive direct action, that kind of thing, right? You see this all throughout history. People have faced worse odds than we face now, and when a group of people come together, they organize themselves, and they become willing to do whatever is necessary to make this change, you know, often because their lives depend on it, then sometimes they win against these ridiculous, overwhelming odds. Like, the suffragettes, right? How many thousands of years of legalized male oppression, right? Gandhi and the Indian independence movement. They went up against the #1 largest military in the world at the time. And Britain knew that a lot of its power came from India, and they still won, right? The civil rights movement in America, and workers' rights movements of all kinds, and you know, this just continues into today. The poll tax, the rent strikes that happened the other year, Palestine Action shut down, I think, the largest arms factory in the UK. I can't remember when, a year ago or so. So basically anywhere where rights have been won for ordinary people, there has been some form of this. And when we look back on these things now, they seem like these huge, you know, noble movements, right, where people came together, you know, large portions of society came together and did things. But that is not what they looked like at the start. It was usually small groups of people who just came together and said, fuck it, we're gonna do this, right? Seem completely ineffectual, because by definition, right, they're going against their whole societies, right? They're small in comparison. You know, media ridicule and even violence. But they still won. And that's because, well, you know, the social change is a science. People spend their whole lives researching and studying how social change works. And so just like with the climate crisis, you have these tipping points and positive feedback loops. Exactly the same thing applies to our social systems. Where, like, herd animals or social animals, when a few of us do something, it becomes a lot easier for other people to do that thing. So, like, it's a lot harder for the first 10 people to get arrested than it is for the next 100 to get arrested. And that's why these things start small, and then they balloon in this snowball effect until they win. It's these mechanisms, non-linear, like positive feedback loops. And a really great example of this is the Freedom Riders. So, I learned about the Freedom Riders in GCSE history. I don't know if y'all did. Well, it was that important, right? This was like a pivotal campaign in the USA civil rights movement in the 60s. It was 1961 when this took place. At this point, African Americans had been living in legalized segregation for like 100 years. You know, hell on earth, basically. And a few years before this movement happened, there was some spark of change. The Montgomery bus boycotts happened, and they won some real victories, right? There was a sense of hope, and then years passed, and nothing else changed by 1961. And there was this sense of like desperation. I imagine kind of how there is now, with people looking around and thinking, are we going to have another 100 years of this to look forward to? And this realization came, you know, then no one else is going to fix this for them other than the ordinary people in that society. And what's crazy about this is this started with 13 students. These 13 students came together and said, you know what, fuck it, we're going to do what's necessary to change something. They're inspired by Gandhi's nonviolent tactics. So at the time, interstate buses were segregated. So they chose that as their like target, right? Desegregate interstate buses. They came up with this crazy kind of genius plan of the 13 of them, 7 of them were black, 6 of them were white, would just sit on a bus and ride into the deep south, the most racist part of the US, where they knew they'd get the most vicious reaction, right? And they knew what they were getting themselves into when they did this. Losing their uni places and, you know, ostracized, ridiculed in the media, and violence, right? Extreme violence. They actually signed their wills before they did this first freedom ride. But they did it anyway, because if not them, like, who else was going to do it? So they rode this bus. They did encounter violence, but they kept going. And their bus journey ended in Alabama, where the KKK surrounded the bus, burst the tires, and threw a bomb into it, and then held the doors closed. Actually, this had been arranged with the police department in that area. The police would give the KKK 15 minutes to do this before coming in, right? They managed to escape. None of them died. But when they did, they were beaten within an inch of their lives and then dragged off and thrown into maximum security prison. Right, so that was meant to scare people, to dissuade people from doing these freedom rides. And it did for a lot of people. What it also did is generate massive media attention. And some people who saw that were inspired themselves by, you know, the bravery and the selflessness from where these actions ultimately came, right? So literally within 2 days, another bus came with 10 people and met a similar kind of fate, which generated more media attention, and this thing snowballed, right? And the government started stepping in and throwing these people into prison. The judges in the courtroom, when these freedom riders would present their defense, the judges would turn their chairs and look at the wall instead of listening to them. as like a show of disrespect. But they kept going, and you know, long story short, thousands took part, and within 8 months they got their victory. They desegregated interstate buses. And that started with 13 people. But that movement, that victory, inspired the whole civil rights era from that point forth, right? So yeah. What's great about this is that we are not that first bus where we have to take this terrifying step. We're like the third or the fourth bus. Our job right now is to continue this pressure, continue going out until we reach that exponential curve, and that's where we win. People braver, you know, than me have already popularized basically the idea of getting arrested for climate crisis. So yeah, it's our job to keep going till we win. We win on demand, our simple, common sense demand, which is no new oil and gas licensing. That the UK government immediately halt all new licensing. So this means no more new oil wells, no more new gas fields, right? You know, we can argue about the stuff we have already, but the one thing we have to do is stop expanding. And then once we win this, we can move on to everything else. So when I started doing this last year, there were 30 new licenses in the approval stage. Right now, there's over 100. So again, that just goes to show, I mean, these licenses will happen unless we do something about it. Some of, like just one of these projects, I don't even think it's the largest, will emit as much CO2 as the whole country of Ghana, I believe. Yeah. So, can't let that happen. And we've been busy since then. In April last year, which is roughly when this started, around 500 people had this realization that no one's coming to save them. You know, the window of opportunity is closing, and they decided to take action. These 500 people went out and blockaded all the largest oil terminals in the UK, the 12 largest ones. The one I was at in Navigator in Essex, this was the largest one in the UK, and with 90 people, I think, we managed to hold that site for about 3 weeks, on and off. It's fairly simple stuff, just lying on the road, or you climb into the oil truck and then it can't move, right? Or supergluing yourself to something. But we held that site for 3 weeks. That cost them millions of pounds in lost earnings, and it shut down around 50% of the fuel supply to east of England. But we kept going. We stopped for a while and regrouped, and then in October, we went back out again. People from all over the UK, hundreds of people, came to London and were doing roadblocks every single day in London. This is when the media attention went completely crazy, as we were mixing it with cultural actions like the Van Gogh soup throwing thing, the F1, the football invasions, and all the other art actions and stuff that happened. And it was crazy. I remember coming home every single day, and there's like dodgy newspapers you get for free on the train, just opening it and seeing where is this issue now. All right, page 1, sick. Another day, page 4, another day, page 2. It was pretty remarkable, because this issue was being kept where it's meant to be, in the front pages. And actually, funnily enough, around that time, the Labour Party said no more new oil and gas licenses. They put it in their manifesto, and so did the SNP. And then we didn't stop there. A few weeks later, using that momentum, around 100 people, you know, plucked up the courage and faced some real prison time, and they blockaded the M25, the like largest motorway in the UK, for about a week. Some of my best friends spent weeks and I think like 2 months in prison without trial as a result of that. So yeah, we've had wins since then. As I said, by now, all of the largest parties, other than the Tories, of course, have said no more new oil and gas licensing. Just Stop Oil is almost a household name. Hundreds of people are joining, right, more than ever. And another little win is that membership of less radical organizations has exploded, right? It's these social dynamics. As you lead by example, as you take more radical action, other less radical organizations start to look more normal and people get pulled in that direction. So yeah, the government are hitting back. These new public order bills, draconian, you know, sentences for protesters. But actually this kind of plays into the strategy. It's just like the Freedom Riders bombing that bus, right? It generates media attention and it causes splinters within the government. So the other day we had senior Tory MPs speak out against their own bill after the coronation protests. We have we have 120 top lawyers and prosecutors sign a declaration saying we will not prosecute climate activists. Right? They're actually going against the guidelines at the bottom for doing that. And what's also pretty insane is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights warning the UK government that if they go ahead with these bills, the UK will be put on the human rights abuses list, right? In the same place as like North Korea. And we're going to continue. And that's why we're here today. We're in an action phase right now. So since the 24th of April, people have been doing these slow marches, as Pia mentioned, every day in London. It is kind of a also genius strategy, I would say, because it's non-arrestable. That's the best part about it. You can cause massive disruption if you do it with enough people, and it's non-arrestable. It's just like a normal march. You know, you walk down the middle of the road with placards and banners, chanting and whatever, except instead of one massive group of people doing it, it's small groups, 15 to 20 people. They go down all the largest roads in London at the same time. They walk as slowly as humanly possible while still moving, and they do this in rush hour traffic, right? And we're doing this every single day. It's split by region, so right now I think everyone from Scotland's come to do it. Next week it'll be a different region, hello there. And London's going back out on the 5th of June. Right now we have between a few dozen and 150 people marching every single day. And what's crazy is this also generates media attention, right? But this tactic really starts to work when we have hundreds of people marching every single day. So that's our jobs. We need to keep going so that it builds the momentum so that those hundreds of people join, right? So yeah, so this is not like an information talk, you know, some sort of interesting theories of political change. We're here to actually do something about this, to take action and make something happen. And yeah, you know, there really is no point worrying about the climate crisis and being depressed and, going through this whole thing, if you then just do nothing about it, it doesn't make any sense, right? So we are here to do something about it. And so after coming to these talks, there are 4 next steps, right? These are the things we're going to do. The first thing is donations. This entire thing takes a lot of money to hold these talks, to support people through the arrest process, and all the logistics and all that. And it all comes from donations, right? Everyone donates 1 hour of their wage every month. So if you earn like £50 an hour, you give £50 a month. £100 an hour, £100 a month. We all chip in, and that's how we keep it going. The next thing is volunteering. So to mobilize these hundreds and thousands of people that we have, it's been volunteers working tirelessly to do this. There's a million different things you can do. And this Sunday, just down the road, we're going to be doing like a volunteer day. We're all going to meet, and depending on what your skills are, what you want to do, you can get involved that way. And the third thing is to do an action training. This is actually the same thing that the Freedom Riders did before they went out. They did these trainings, role-playing, exactly what action would be like, right? Preparing themselves, getting all the information about it, and building that sense of community. Even if you're unsure if you want to do it, I would highly recommend it. I keep going to them, even though like I don't need to, right? Every Sunday and Tuesday, they're happening for the next few months. Definitely do that. And of course, take action with Just Stop Oil. Do a slow march. It's good stuff. Having done it myself. And you don't get arrested. All right, cool. I think that's it.
Thank you so much to Holly and Aaron. Now we've got to have a couple personal stories from people who've taken action with Just Stop Oil. And they're going to tell you about their experience about the civil resistance. So first we got Rosie.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Rosie. I'm 24, and I'm currently facing up to 10 years in prison for crime activism. Yay. How did I get here? Well, I don't know, I always thought I knew about the climate crisis, right? It was always this thing in my head. I was like, yeah, I'm so worried about it. I've been a vegan for years, and a lot of that was trying to talk to people about why going vegan is good for the environment. But I never really connected with it like that. And the first time I ever got involved with Just Stop Oil, I came along to a talk. It was just like this, but it was in a small little cafe, and they were doing the same kind of thing. It was the same structure. They were telling you about the climate crisis, and they were telling you about the social science of resistance. And when they were telling me the stories of the climate crisis, it was horrible. I felt so anxious in that room. I wanted to get out as quickly as possible. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be sitting down and being confronted with the facts of my future. I was worried about it, but I never actually sat down and thought or listened, gave myself the opportunity to feel the emotional pain of what's happening to our world. And I was so scared. I wanted to leave the room. I wanted to get out, but there's so many people around me that I couldn't do it. I physically couldn't have got out, and I was too nervous to disrupt people, ironically. But the thing that they asked at the end of that talk was, they asked everybody in the room, they said, right, you've heard the facts, you know how scary it is, you know that this is going to be something that's happening in your future, not your children's future, your future. What are you going to do about it? What we're asking you to do about it is to get arrested. And I was like, fuck off, man, there's no way in hell, like, I'm not doing that. And I was like, everybody in the room was kind of like, yeah, cool. But I was like, what are you on about? Like, I'm not doing that. There's no way. I don't know, like, I'm quite a nervous person, right? I quite like my home comfort. I'm not an adrenaline junkie in any way. And I was like, no, I'm too scared. Like, I'm too scared of a person to do something like that, to disrupt my, like, future like that. You know, I want to get a job and, like, have a nice family and do things. I don't want a criminal record. And I was like, nah, I'm not doing it. I listened to the talk, I was scared, and then I put it to the back of my head, and I was like, there's no way, I'm not doing it. But months went on, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. I kept thinking about that feeling of just fear, this horrible fear I had inside me about the climate crisis. And I was like, right, I'm terrified, I'm really scared, but Just Stop Oil is doing an action, and I'm gonna go along, and I'm gonna do it. So I went to, April last year, I went down to Birmingham, and I blocked an oil terminal there. After that, I went to Glasgow. It was my first time getting arrested, and I blocked another oil terminal. After that, I threw paint on a government building in Edinburgh on the day that they announced that they were going ahead with the Jackdaw oil fields, which I don't know if you guys know about it. Really huge, devastating, and you know, on Scottish seas, and I'm Scottish, so really heartbreaking. And I was so scared when I was doing that. It wasn't like that fear like magically disappeared. I was still really, really scared. But I was so proud of myself. I was so proud of myself for like feeling that fear and doing it anyway. And knowing like, and having that power within myself and the power like within my body to sit down in front of lorries, these huge lorries, or to throw paint while everybody's watching me and get dragged away by police officers. I was so proud of myself. And obviously when you're in a prison cell, you have like quite a lot of time to think, right? And I was sitting there and kind of like reflecting back on my feelings, how was I coping with this? And I don't know, you get kind of scared afterwards sometimes, because you know, you're sitting in a cell, it's kind of boring, you're thinking about it. But the thing that like kept coming back every single time I've been arrested is when you get in a jail cell, they give you a blanket, they give you water, they give you hot food, there's a working toilet in your cell, right? Very, very minimal accommodation, but that hot food, those blankets, that water, that's far more of a guarantee of like a healthy living than we're gonna get if the climate crisis continues to go this way. It's gonna, if we don't stand up to our government, we're not gonna have guaranteed hot food or even food. We're not gonna have clean water. We're not gonna have sanitary toilets. We're not gonna have shelter. So although it was scary, and I really was so scared, but I did it anyway, and I was really, really proud of myself. And then after I did that paint action, I got out and like, as you do, I phoned my family, and I said, hey, Mum and Dad, just been arrested again. And I was speaking to my dad, and he said he was like really disappointed in me. And you know, it was kind of horrible to hear. This is somebody I love tell me like outright, I'm disappointed in you, after I'd just done something I was so proud of. But my dad, right, my dad's South African. My early childhood was spent in South Africa. And we grew up in this coastal town on the east coast called Knysna, right? And Knysna gets wildfires, it's known for its pretty irregular currents. But it never comes as far down onto the actual town. So it's like hilltops and it's down onto the coast. It doesn't really get down onto the coast, that doesn't happen. But in 2015, Knysna experienced one of the worst wildfires that's happened in recent South African history. And this man, my dad, who said he wasn't proud of me for taking climate action, was the same man who was crying as he watched from afar his family houses being burnt down, his friends' houses being burnt down, the church that him and my mom got married in burning to the ground. 7 people died in that wildfire. And then afterwards, I moved to London. And within a few months of me living in London, there's wildfires on my doorstep. You know, not in Africa, in bloody London. And I just had this feeling of like fuck my fear, you know? Like Aaron was saying, like, yeah, it's scary. It's scary to go out and get arrested. But the climate crisis is far scarier. And I don't want to sit there in silence as my future's like being torn away from me. I'm not going to do that. So the big one, the 10-year one, I was part of the group that went onto the M25 and climbed up the gantries and blocked the M25. And now that one was really fucking scary. That one was like terrifying. But I don't regret it, you know. I'm facing a potential very, very long time in prison. I said 10 years before, but actually with the new order bill, it's actually like life imprisonment, potentially. But like, so what, you know? So what? Because I'm not gonna sit back. I'm not gonna let this government kill me. I'm not gonna sit back in silence. I wanna do something about it. I want to feel like I'm actually saying, like, fuck off, like, fuck you for trying to take my future. I'm not gonna allow it to happen. And you can do that too. But yeah, this time it's not like, Just Stop Oil's not currently asking you right now in this talk, go and get out and get arrested, right? That's not what we're asking. We're asking you to come on a slow march, man. It's like, you're walking slowly through town. You're walking slowly, there's a very, very low risk of arrest. It's happening every single day. It's on your doorstep. Like, there's no excuse not to come along. Take a few days off work. They're quite fun. There's community days afterwards. But yeah, I want you to, because I say it like that, like it's easy, but it still is scary, right? You're still blocking the government. But I want you to feel in yourself and embrace that fear, you know? If I can fucking embrace the fear, you can embrace the fear too, and you can go out and you can slow march from the 5th of July, or June. 5th of June.
The last personal story we have tonight, before we split out in the breakout room to talk about what we've heard and what we want to do about it, we've got Luke. Woo! Woo!
Not gonna lie, I kind of feel like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but there's a few new faces, so it's okay. Forgive me if I'm a bit nervous, I'm not used to this. If I'm being honest, I'd rather be climbing the gantry in the M25 right now. I ain't gonna lie, I would. But hey ho, it's what it is. Let me just find my page. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Luke. I'm 30 years old, I live in East London and I'm a sport worker. A year and a half ago, I moved down to London in the hopes to become a full-time artist. That was the dream, you know, just to paint every day and make a living out of the thing that I love to do the most. But somehow I ended up putting down my paintbrush and picking up an orange banner with a very simple message on it. Because in all honesty, I don't have a choice. How can I stand by and allow my niece's future to be sacrificed for the sake of profit and power? She's 3 years old, and in 2050 she'll be my age, and I know what awaits her if we continue the way we're going. And it breaks my heart, like it truly does. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And when I think about her future, I should be excited and hopeful. I'm her uncle. I want to be excited. I want to be hopeful for her. But I'm not. I'm fucking terrified. Like, I'm terrified. And again, it fucking breaks my heart. Now I've lost my spot. She's innocent in all of this, like all of our loved ones. And I'm determined to do everything I can, everything, to safeguard her future. And if that means putting my dreams aside for a couple of years, then that's completely fine, because it's worth it. And if that means going to prison, so be it. If that means taking up civil disobedience, that's what I'll continue to do. Like, it's my obligation to do everything I can, not just for her, but the future generations, right? Our future is with them. And as it stands, they don't have much of a future. They have a future where it's going to be incredibly hard to live. And I can't stop thinking about it. I can't get my head around it. So that's why I'm here today. How can I do nothing while millions of people in the global south suffer and die? People being forced to move away from their homes and from everything that they know. The ones who contributed the least end up suffering the most. And I don't want to live in a fucking world like that. I refuse to live in a world like that. Where's the justice? There is none. And it's not fair. It's no longer climate change. It's fucking climate emergency. Simple as that. It's affecting us now. From Central Africa to India, from Pakistan to the UK. Last summer alone, over 3,000 elderly died because of the heat waves and excessive heat that we experienced. While others freeze to death in their homes because they can't afford to heat their fucking house. I don't want to live in a world like that. I refuse to live in a world like that. And that's happening here, right now, and it's only going to get worse. How can I allow nature, the one thing we owe fucking everything to, be destroyed? It's not a resource. It's not ours to do what we wish with. It's our life support system. And if it goes, so does everything we've ever loved and held dear. It'll all be gone. But, and it's a big but, we can change that together. I've now found myself in such a beautiful community of people, and I mean beautiful and inspiring. A beautiful community of people who aren't just filled with as much frustration, anger, and fucking fear as I am. People who are actually doing something about it. And we won't stop, and we'll keep fighting for change we so desperately need. I have to say, it's done wonders for my climate anxiety, I'm not gonna lie. And I found hope again. Something, in all honesty, that I lost for a long time. But history has shown us that great change has to be fought for and won by the people. Everyday people like you and me. And now is the time. And now the time has come again for the people, us, to fight and bring great change. Because the powers that be won 27 COPs, 27. And for the past 27 years, global emissions have only risen. That tells you everything that you know about the people that govern us. They don't give a fuck. I do. and everyone in this room gives a fuck. Hence why you're here. So join us on the roads. March with us, slowly, of course. Donate, volunteer. There's a place for you, all of you, in JSO. And I promise you won't regret it. I promise. This is the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced in its history. And I'm fucking terrified. I'm terrified. But I have hope. And I've found strength through JSO, or Just Stop Oil. We can bring great change. We have to do it together. And that starts with standing under an orange banner that says the words, Just Stop Oil. Now ask yourself at this point, do I really have a choice? Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our amazing speakers. I had goosebumps several times. Yeah, little breakout room, talk about how we feel, what we can do, and yeah, then we can just jam.
I have a quick question.
Go on.
Because I know that non-violence is important to build popular support. These days, Extinction Rebellion is popular support alliances. And I'm just wondering to what extent violence is justified. Very recently there was a movie called How to Blow Up the Pipeline that now talking about explosives, terrorism is okay, and I just want to own it. I just want to put my life on the line, and I just want to make it absolutely clear that I'm not mentally crazy, I'm not mentally ill, such as say hunger strike. I would like to go on a hunger strike, put my life on the line, get my papers, health insurance, a doctor, get some live TV, and I'll go as long as it takes. I just want to make it absolutely, abundantly clear that I'm putting my life on the line, but I want to do this in a legal way. So me convincing you to commit suicide, it is up to 14 years in prison, okay? But me committing suicide is not illegal. So I really want to make it, but I have kids, and I have a good life, and I own a home, I have a purpose in life. So I want to balance it out. I want to say what I would like to do, be the change you want to see. However, I'm a father, I have kids, I own a home, I have a good life, I have loads of skills. I'm 37, no medical conditions. It's not a good time to die, basically.
No, but I see, like, for example, a hunger strike is a non-violent tactic, but we can talk
Okay.
about that, like, yeah, after
Thank
the
you.
breakout room, and we can, like, explore our options, but non-violence is, yeah, the, yeah, we'll talk about it in a bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. How should we do this? Small group? A big,
One big
a small,
circle,
a
yeah.
big small group?
Not
Yeah.
loads of us, yeah.